Yesterday, I know you guys probably got into this a little bit on this show. I had people working at the house all day long, so I didn't get to see much of it. But, there was some, scuttlebutt at this CFP meeting about expanding the playoff early, which got tabled last year. And now, now they're considering it again. Which I think is just it's just such ridiculous political BS that you would table it for a year, and then when the big dogs kind of get what they want, they're like, oh, now we can talk about it. It's just so...
All of a sudden it matters?
All of a sudden it matters again. Those convenient. Little things, yeah. And, but if that, if they do, kind of expand the playoff early, and what annoyed me about it was, and I know you saw this, Craig, where they said in the meeting, they said, well, we've clearly left significant dollars on the table for this. And you're like, well, no ass, dude. We all know that, and we're not even in charge. How did you, why would you do that other than you all got played by Kevin Warren and Greg Sankey? And not even really Greg Sankey. Greg Sankey was pushing for it. So that was yesterday, and that kind of all ties into this. Now that the Big Ten is super fat and super happy on this deal, I would not be surprised to see things move pretty smoothly in regard to a lot because their future is secure no matter what happens.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the power brokers, so to speak, I don't think we're really waiting on Brett Yormark to call heads or tails on whether the playoff expands. I think now it's sort of settles down a bit, and I'm sure that we'll hear more of the drum beats growing for this playoff expansion, whatever that's going to look like, and that will be, as you alluded to earlier, fascinating to see how quickly they can possibly put something together, and just how deep do they actually go with this thing? What does this ultimately look like, and what does access ultimately look like, and is it a scenario where there's 10 teams, but 4 each from the Big Ten or the SEC in some scenario like that? I know is what people are fearful of. So you would think that becomes a much more prominent topic of conversation. Not that it's ever really not a conversation, but it does seem like there was a lot of intentionality with kind of how that was played the last couple of years. And, Warren in particular with the alliance and just its effect on things. But, now that they've seemingly are fat and happy for the time being, as of today, this contract is what it is, then, I would think that there's going to be some more movement on that. But I just see pointed out that, Kevin Warren didn't exactly lie as far as the money figure. Yeah, the Big Ten is going to get their money figures about what he said, and I know that there's escalators there towards the back end. I wasn't trying to knock Kevin Warren or anything. It's just that it wasn't like it's going to be a $2.4 billion. Every week it seemed like the number got higher and higher and higher. And, it eventually fell where it fell, right about where it was probably originally reported to be. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that, it wasn't just – it's record-breaking. I don't know how many times to say that, but it wasn't like $1 billion per team or something, that insane. But, absolutely a huge deal, $100 million plus, ultimately for everybody involved. And I'm not knocking it. I just, it's good to see that it's finally finalized. That's all.
Congo, $5 super chat. And by the way, thank you, greatest ever, for your $2 super chat as well. Which academic, athletic, or other program would you pursue if you were Kevin Warren after this TV deal? I'm going to take Notre Dame out of it because I just think that's not necessarily them being pursued because they're pursued by everybody all the time. But I would, again, if I'm them, I kind of want. It makes sense for me to go on the West Coast and solidify that. And, completely with Oregon or Washington or something like that. But
Notre Dame's the obvious. That's the super obvious question or answer to the question is clearly Notre Dame. I think beyond that, you would automatically assume West, but I've maintained this the entire time. If I'm in the Big 12, I'm not sitting there acting like everybody's locked up their part of the house. Again, they have a contract coming up in a couple years, so I do think it was kind of funny how people, reacted so emphatically to did you see the TCU AD and the whole dust up with that? He just said he was in Chicago, and everybody's like, oh, my God, he's in Big Ten territory, and it turns out he's, just visiting alumni or whatever. But, that created, this new wave, and then, a day later, here's this Big Ten TV deal, and, TCU's a Texas school. There's been a lot of discussion on, how are they going to expand if they continue expanding? East makes the most sense as far as big money brands that they don't have just yet. West, obviously, there's some more meat to chew on if they want to. But, like, what hardly gets mentioned is, okay, what would you potentially – like, what do you want to potentially do South? So if I'm the Big 12, I'm still on high alert. I'm checking the locks every night before I go to bed and make sure there's no holes in the fences. But I think academic and all that standpoint, I mean, the West Coast schools seem to be the easiest chess piece to maneuver first. But the way that deal lines up, and again, I need to read more about it, but like the details of the contracts, like, and how that lines up. But I mean, it seems like it would line up pretty well at the end of that ACC deal, at least in the same ballpark. And maybe that's more doable. And I would think that if that's more doable, then certainly a couple of those brands would be more attractive than the West Coast. But that's down the line, obviously. That's towards the end of the deal. So, yeah, up front, I would think it's the Oregon, Washington, or, that kind of a puzzle piece. But I don't really know for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, look.
Or Notre Dame, first, obviously.
Yeah, but like you said, if it's 2030 – it's 2030 is the deal's over for the Big Ten, so they can do another one. Then it's a 7-year deal. It's 2032 for 34, something for the SEC and ESPN's
ACC
exclusive.
Is 2036.
2036. So, again, you're going to have that time. And one would assume that the next two deals would follow along that 7-8-year timeline.
Like the Big 12s and Pac-12s?
Yeah. You would figure that would be in. So, yeah, when, like you said, in the 2030s, when that pops up, we could have chaos again. But, yeah, even if you're 5 years out of the ACC teams being available, at that point, the grant of rights might become a little bit more navigatable when you're a team like Clemson or Florida State or Miami or North Carolina that says, okay, well, we've come as far as we have here. Especially depending what happens with those schools in that time frame.
Well, if I read it correctly, the $100 million per year is going to be coming at the back end of that deal, right?
Yeah.
So when they're in the back end of that deal, and that's what I was referencing, like they're not making $100 million at the gate, but they're making $100 million per school by the end of that deal. So by the end of that deal, that's coming up. They're going to have time to negotiate a new contract around the same time that others will then have their contracts opening up within a very similar situation to right now, quite frankly. I'd imagine, like you said, the Pac and the Big 12 are going to have something that's like a 7-year deals or 8-year deals, something like that, to stay in that time frame. And then, yeah, if you're those schools that have all been rumored, think about everybody that's been rumored so far. You've had the two LA schools were never really, I guess in like deep realignment Twitter, like they've been, or Reddit or whatever, there's always been constant chaos discussed. But, as far as like, hey, this is about to happen, I don't think there was that in regards to UCLA for sure. USC, that's just one of those that, like, hey, they obviously are not getting their end of the bargain like a Texas, like an Oklahoma, so they just always are seemingly in play. But, we're basically in a situation now where this could all just reset, and you're Clemson or you're Florida State, and after this period of time that you're wanted and that you're valuable. And I don't know the number figures like others do to how much would Florida State up the payout for Michigan. I don't know that, but by the time that rolls around, if everything stays pat, and in the ACC it will, unless ESPN decides to renegotiate some deal, which I'm not sure why they would do that, then that $100 million is going to look really good to Clemson and to Florida State. And it would come at a time when there is a lot more flexibility. So that will be, down the road, obviously, but that is something that's definitely in play still as a result of the news today.
I don't see ESPN waking up in the morning and just feeling all of a sudden benevolent and sympathetic towards the ACC and a deal that they made and going like, you know what? You guys are such nice guys. Let's give you more money.
Just isn't fair for you guys. We're going to make life fair for y'all.
Yeah, no. And the interesting thing about that is if you look at those schools that we've talked about or anybody interested, if the SEC's up in 2032, you're up in 2036, you've got now schools that could bid against you. So you could really up your value as far as, people competing against you as opposed to, yeah, sure, we'll just go here, So,
well, and especially, what does their deal look like? What does anybody's deal look like outside of these? Like, we know the big triple window that the Big Ten's going to have on 3 broadcast networks throughout a Saturday, which is just absolutely massive for them, and that'll be great. But, yeah, what is so if you're ACC's got theirs locked in stone, but if you're the Pac-12, depending on what you get signed, you look up 5 years down the road, and your new grant of rights is probably going to be in that vicinity, and everybody's over there is making $100 million, and you're potentially wanted, and you're probably not on a CBS, Fox, NBC freaking lineup every Saturday. You're on whatever the Pac-12 is going to scrum together. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of I guess just ride the storm out for some teams, and a lot of just like, let's just get ready, strap down, do the best we can these next few years, and see where it all comes out in the wash here in about another 8 or 9.
And Bob Thompson, Fox Sports, former Fox Sports president, is up next, and Jacob, I'll get you your super chat here in a second. But he mentions in the interview, he said, look, ESPN is probably where the Pac-12's going. That's really where their inventory is going to be, because it may be some Fox Sports 1 kind of the thing there, but NBC and CBS are off the table for them more than likely based on what they want. He did mention that because of the middays and Notre Dame's home schedule, because that's what NBC has. People kind of leave that part out. NBC has Notre Dame's home games. They don't have Notre Dame exclusively. They have the home games exclusively and neutral sites exclusively. So there are weeks that they will not have a game to do a doubleheader with the Big Ten, because Notre Dame will not be on their channel. So that maybe opens some stuff up for the Big 12 on NBC. So, there's that possibility there for the Big 12. But again, the Pac-12, you're pretty much looking at ESPN. Same with the Big 12, but like the Pac-12 maybe has a little narrow thing. And, they might be able to do, 2 10:30 Eastern windows and make that amenable so that, Fox gets one, ESPN gets one. But, they're going to have to get really creative to make this worth their while. And again, I don't think expansion is imminent anytime soon, but we've never thought it was imminent in the first place. So it just kind of...
Yeah, nobody was really predicting USC, UCLA, or really Oklahoma, Texas, the one that got the big ball rolling, quite frankly.
Yeah, the last time it happened with A&M and Nebraska and Missouri and Colorado over that 2-year period, everybody was pretty pronouncedly angry at Texas for a decade. You just knew it was something that was going to come to a head, as opposed to waking up in the morning and going, what now? Which is what's happened 2 years in a row. All right, last